It's an honor and privilege to be chairing this session, addressing social isolation and loneliness. We have some great speakers. Two of them are the panel. The first speaker will be presenting by video. And before I introduce the first speaker, I just want to talk a little bit about social isolation and about loneliness. The first example of social isolation I want to talk about is ageism, and I want to credit popular culture for ageism, and in particular, these two gentlemen. I'm going to give them credit for being ageist. You might recognize them. Who are they? The Who. So, and this is Friday evening at Rogers Arena, and here they are singing My Generation. The famous lines from My Generation were, "I hope I die before I get old." And now they're in their 70s, and here they are dancing around the stage, singing around the world, singing about being ageist. But if you think about our population, there are now more people over 65 in Canada than under the age of 15. At the same time, there are, for every one geriatrician, there are 10 pediatricians. So think about, it's true. You're laughing, but it's true. You're laughing because it seems ridiculous to think this, right? That there are, let me give you a personal example of this. Pull up another picture. Here we go. So, that's my daughter and my grandma. So our daughter has a genetic condition. She has a pediatrician who coordinates all her care. She's blessed with the fact that we have a robust medical system for people who are children. For our pediatric system's phenomenal. Children's Hospital is world class. She has access to the best possible medical care she could get. In school, she needs a support because of her medical condition, and it also affects her cognitive ability. She's a cognitive impairment, and she has 6 hours of direct care. Okay? Meanwhile, Grandma, when she had a stroke and had a cognitive impairment, she disappeared from her condo and was cast aside by her loving family, including her grandson, to a nursing home. And in the nursing home, she gets under 3 hours of direct care. Okay? So if you think about what we need to do around planning for the elderly and where our priorities need to change, I think one example I love to mention is that in Canada, there are more nursing homes than there are Starbucks coffee shops. Okay, so things to think about. So that's maybe just ageism generally, and you know why we cast aside some elderly to the nursing homes? It's because of the idea that seniors, when they can no longer function like young people, that's what happens. And there's a term that irks me, and you know this word, it's still. Okay, and I'd like you to play along. The word still, S-T-I-L. Okay, so this is how it goes. You probably heard these conversations in social situations. Someone gets up and says, well, my dad, he's 79, and he still drives. And then somebody next says, well, that's nothing. My uncle, he's 84, and he goes to work. Of course, there's always somebody in that social situation that wants to one-up everybody. Yeah. And they'll say, well, that's nothing. My granddaddy, he just got back from climbing Mount Everest. He's 94, and he spends his winters in the Okanagan, where every day he water skis. Barefoot. In the nude. So I want to show you one more, oops, I don't know who that is, but I'm going to show you one more picture, if I can get there.
Are you showing us a picture of your grandpa?
Yeah, that was him.
Oh, okay.
So I want to show you a gravestone of someone who was very, very lonely. Probably perhaps the most loneliest character that anyone's ever heard of. This person was a widow. She lived in a dream world. She would stare out a window all day long. She wore a different face when she went into public to show the public that she wasn't really lonely. She went to church. The father of the church, his name is Father Mackenzie, he preached to an empty church. You're laughing because I think you know who I'm talking about. He writes sermons that nobody listens to. He buries her, she dies at church, he buries her, and no one else is at the funeral. What's Eleanor's last name? Rigby. You know the story. And what's interesting about Eleanor Rigby is that song was #1 in the charts 50 years ago. So 50 years ago, we were talking about lonely people and elderly. And it was the first time that a rock song had been hit the charts at that level that was not about love, but about the elderly and loneliness. And it's a great song, and I think is much ahead of its time. So without further ado, we're going to watch a video of the first speaker. It's David Wilder. He's a retired lawyer, and the title is The Possibilities of Autonomous Vehicles and Other Transportation Innovations.
Thank you for inviting me to your conference. Like all of you, I'm indebted to John Friesen for endowing it. The Elizabethan philosopher Bacon said, conference between good men is but knowledge in the making. Not currently politically correct, perhaps, but the point is valid. I'm here to talk about loneliness and autonomous vehicles and the senior community. There is a reason that solitary confinement is the worst punishment that a prison system can hand out. Deprived of the stimulation of human contact, despair, madness in the classical sense, and loss of the will to live is predictable. But that's exactly what we do to a senior whose ability to drive is taken away by infirmity or failure of eyesight or by statute. No longer to join companions for lunch or shows, unable to shop for herself without extreme effort, she is condemned to solitary confinement in her cottage or high-rise. The situation is worse in our auto-dependent suburbs, which make shopping, access to services, or entertainment utterly dependent on cars. In the center city, buses help, but getting on and off a bus with its steep stairs, crowded in with strangers, is an ordeal aging hips and knees can't look forward to. The crowds and smell are intimidating, even with a mild degree of dementia. The bus stop is never exactly where she wants to go, so she has to walk alone, often in the dark, and in the winter, with threat of icy sidewalks causing a hip fracture with its life-shortening consequences. But first, 2 caveats. The first is when Dean Gutman and I first discussed this topic in early February, it was leading, if not bleeding edge, in discussions of social impact. Now autonomous vehicles are a popular topic in the general press. The Conference Board of Canada has held an all-day seminar on the subject. The March 2016 edition of Esquire had 5 pages on the subject. April 2016 Wired magazine published a study on the redesign of cities to cope with autonomous vehicles. May 2016 Consumer Reports has an article on the subject. As both Esquire and Consumer Reports draw on interviews and visits to Stanford or Google, I suspect a PR push by one or more of the players in the AV universe to create a political favorable climate. And on it goes. The Economist of London has kept a watchful eye on the subject. EY, the consulting arm of one of the big 4 accounting firms, Ernst & Young, published a study of the impact of AVs on the auto insurance industry. The second caveat is that this presentation was pre-recorded on the 22nd of April. On the 18th of April, Beverly Hills, California authorized a major study for the use of autonomous vehicles as a supplement to its municipal bus system. There could be further developments in the rollout of autonomous vehicles by the time this is displayed that could make this discussion seem hopelessly dated. Now, how did I come to the study of autonomous vehicles? I was chairing a committee on policy changes in a major national political party. I became concerned about the risk of pouring stimulus funds into masses of concrete for freeways which might never be utilized, as the technology could at least double freeway capacity and change land use patterns. There is no point in sterilizing thousands of acres of land and disfiguring communities if the freeways aren't fully used. The blight could be good for centuries. Now, what are autonomous vehicles, or AVs? They are vehicles that drive themselves with no driver or human intervention. How would they be used? Supposing a senior is living alone in a high-rise apartment. She wishes to go shopping, join friends for lunch, and be home before supper. Or perhaps she wishes to go out in the evening to a movie with friends and have tea or a drink with them before coming home. She summons an autonomous vehicle with her smartphone. It picks her up from her apartment building, takes her to the boutique, and disappears. After lunch, the smartphone summons an autonomous vehicle to take her directly from the restaurant to apartment building. The chances of becoming clinically depressed are substantially reduced. With the freedom provided by mobility, she can stay engaged with friends, family, and her community. Losing a driver's license by reason of infirmity or poor eyesight is no longer a major tragedy. The costs of the public health system are sharply reduced. She is in her own home. Even if she needs help with medication from a public health nurse or keeping her apartment clean and tidy with the assistance of a visiting cleaner, the cost will be orders of magnitude lower than a care facility with its uneven standards and limited chances to be outside. She can choose her own company and places to visit. Quality of life is enhanced and public costs are reduced. Now, how far away is this nirvana? One of the wild cards is hacking into the extra-vehicle communication, thus causing havoc. One demonstration last year involved a Jeep Cherokee being hijacked by, in effect, a laptop and a cell phone. This was a shadow only, as all the major players are aware of the issue and are no doubt working on it. But widespread use will require major assurances. To illustrate the point, it's been stated, not by Mercedes, but by a senior automotive journalist, that a Mercedes S500 now has more lines of code in it than a Boeing 787. The opposition to change will come from sectors of the economy with a lot to lose. The automobile insurance industry is the first opponent of note. With the much higher standards of safety, which I'll discuss later, auto insurance premiums will be sharply reduced. The plaintiffs' lawyers who are influential in American politics will see their income as a group reduced. The defense lawyers whose predictable billings help sustain the large law firms will make common cause with the plaintiffs' bar. The insurance companies will not suffer a substantial diminution in premium income willingly. Recall that during the first Clinton presidency, plans for universal health insurance proposed by Bill and Hillary were frustrated by a coalition of insurers who spent millions on advertising and lobbying to prevent it coming into force. Even Obamacare still has its vociferous and well-bankrolled opponents. Local insurance agents who are active in local politics will not be pleased with the loss of auto insurance premium incomes. State and provincial politicians will be upset by a decreased demand for roads, as highway contractors have long been substantial contributors to politicians' campaigns. If ownership of car patterns change, as I predict, local car dealers will be vigorous opponents of any change in use. The ferocious campaign by car dealers in the States to prevent Tesla from rolling out its sales effort, which relies on company stores, is a good example. But with electric cars having much reduced demand for servicing, car dealers may face extinction, as the real profits are in their repair shops, not in their sales. Note that autonomous and electric vehicles are not the same. However, the technologies are arriving together. Nevertheless, change is coming. About 3 years ago, Mercedes forecast that if only 30% of the cars on a freeway were autonomous, the capacity of the freeway would be raised by 50%. The state of Victoria, Australia, in its Research Institute report last year, forecast that at a 50% level of autonomous vehicles on a freeway, the capacity of the freeway would be doubled. Napoleon is said to have remarked that God is on the side of the big battalions. The battalions on the side of change are big. General Motors, for instance, has put $500 million into Lyft, a competitor to the better-known Uber, the provider of taxi services in many places. It's one short step from providing taxi services with major software in back of the service to providing the same service without drivers. Google is the world's most valuable software firm with huge cash reserves. It released earnings yesterday. It made $3.54 billion in the quarter after setting aside about $850 million for its experimental ventures, which include the self-driving cars. It's racked up over 4 million miles, principally on the roads in and around Palo Alto, California, which includes a section of the highly congested 405 freeway. It has had 5 accidents, all minor, only one of which was its fault, and received 1 traffic ticket for driving too slow. This is substantially better than the performance of an alert and competent human driver for equivalent mileage. No wonder insurers are alarmed. Premiums will melt. Mercedes will roll out autonomous heavy trucks in Germany and Nevada this fall. Volvo, a Chinese-owned firm, last year demonstrated the ability of one of its cars to arrive at a restaurant on Santa Monica Boulevard, discharge its passengers, and drive off with no human on board, park itself nearby, and return to pick up its passengers when summoned by a smartphone. Tesla now has as an option a self-parking ability whereby the car will park itself unaided in very tight parking spaces and emerge when called. The operator must be within 10 meters of the car. Now here is where we leave engineering and rejoin sociology with its imprecision. Inertia is a fact in human institutions and habits, but profit is no respecter of inertia. Institutional practices are changing quickly. The U.S. federal government has issued an opinion of the Chief Counsel of the National Highway Administration that providing the proponents of autonomous vehicles can show that they are at least as safe as vehicles operated by an alert and competent driver, there is no reason why they cannot be operated on public roads. Enter Google. The UK government has announced that no statute changes will be needed to introduce autonomous vehicles, that certain regulations would have to be amended. Quote, fine-tuning, unquote, was the phrase the Minister of Transportation used. 32 states in the U.S. have published regulations or considered draft legislation in the field. Several, including California, have bills that are through or very nearly through the legislative process. Singapore, which has a very dense traffic problem, has announced it has approved trials of autonomous taxis commencing this September. Canada is officially quiet. Human inertia is a factor. People don't like changing habits. According to Stats Canada, 77% of male seniors able to drive own automobiles and like using them. The figures for women are somewhat lower. Many of the houses, if not most, that seniors own have garages. The incentive for change is reduced. However, as seniors downsize to realize the gains locked into their houses, the 400 square feet or so set aside for driveways and garages may impact their choices on what to do next. No longer do almost all teenagers obtain a driver's license as soon as they are legally able. Younger people who live in city centers don't want to own a car. They rent a car of an appropriate size for what they want to do by the hour or half day. Evo, or its competitors, do well in the city but don't flourish in the suburbs. The economics are compelling. No longer do city or suburban dwellers need to own a car. No monthly parking or its equivalent in wasted space. No insurance on a machine that's idle roughly 97% of its life. No periodic maintenance charges. The savings mount up rapidly, even without depreciation, which shows up at resale time. Instead, charges only for periodic short-term use. As individual ownership subsides, the fleet owners, leasing companies, or more likely consortia of banks, manufacturers, and/or the software industry integrators or technology companies merge as the providers. As the industry consolidates, competition is lessened, as few organizations will be able or be willing to risk the large front-end costs to provide the autonomous vehicles requirements. The profits will be enormous. Who loses? Car dealers, insurance agents, plaintiffs' lawyers. Not much public sympathy there. There are partway solutions coming to market. Self-driving cars are like planes with autopilots. The driver can automate himself with a fair degree of safety, but take control when necessary or desirable. By 2020, these cars have been promised by Nissan, Renault, and Mercedes. Ford and Toyota are already offering self-parking, lane alert to prevent inadvertent change of lanes, and a standby system that will automatically brake a car as hard as necessary if collision is imminent. The industry consensus seems to be that self-driving comes in around 2020, and autonomous vehicles within a decade or two thereafter. Seniors as a group are major winners. No longer will they be confined to their apartments or cottages when driving is no longer an option. They will have at their disposal the equivalent mobility. With no human drivers and no fixed vehicle charges, the use of autonomous vehicles will be a major liberating technology. I hope this has been a bit of a window into a structure that most of you didn't even know was being built. I'll be delighted to answer questions if you'll email me at the address provided by the website for this conference, and I'll do my best to answer when I get back from France. Thank you.
So, what a great presentation. I appreciate the way in which you engaged with the video. It's a good example of a technological innovation. We wouldn't have imagined doing this a few decades ago. So if you can think about that difference, what it might have been like having the idea of having a video presentation at a conference as a kind of outside the box idea. Think about cars not using gas. Some of the car companies now are saying that they promise to get out of the gas business altogether. Self-parking, and how liberating that would be for a senior to not be stuck in their home, having an autonomous vehicle available to them, how that will revolutionize the whole area around home care and home support and people living independently. It'll really change the world for seniors, and what a great idea, and then something we should really grasp onto and cheer along and be proponents of. And I think he's serious about the questions. Please do email him. At least a few of you email so he knows that you are paying attention, please. We all need feedback. The next speaker is David Wilder. He is a retired lawyer. His topic is around digital storytelling. And of course, you'll notice that there's a theme here between, sorry?
Flipped around.
Oh, David Kaufman?
Yeah.
Thank you. What did I say? Okay.
Just remember
Do you
the
want to hear David
part.
Wilder again? And you'll notice the theme through social isolation here is around technology being the innovation that's going to help address the issue. So without further ado.
Thank you so much. As I take my time to go up to the podium at my age, please feel free to stand up and stretch a little bit. I know we've just listened to 20 minutes of straight talk, okay? So please, you'd help me a little bit in terms of your attention. Or just stretch. Thank you so much. Our chair has suggested we do jumping jacks. Should we do that, Nick? No, okay. So for some of you who were here last year and saw me on video, I apologize. This is what I look like in person. I'm sorry. I can't do anything about that. That's just the way it is. So I'm going to talk about increasing social connections through digital storytelling, some early findings. And here's what I'll talk about for a few minutes. So I'll talk about our project, the workshop that we've been delivering, some of the research questions around that and method, a little bit about our preliminary results, because we're in the process of analyzing everything, conclusions and next steps. I promise you there'll be no tables or charts. So you can just keep calm and pay attention. Okay, so here we go. So digital storytelling is a modern expression, or some people would say a modern expression, of the ancient art of storytelling. And digital stories, as you can see, derive their power by weaving images, music, narrative, and voice together. And therefore, they give deep dimension, vivid color to the characters, situations, experiences, and insights. In fact, we know that video is very powerful for conveying emotion. Simply put, somebody says, what is it? Digital storytelling, it's a form of narrative, stories that creates short movies using simple media technology. So this project, we're investigating the experience of older adults creating their own digital stories during an 8 to 10 week digital storytelling. In some places it was 8 weeks, others it was 9, sometimes it was 10. And also we're looking at the impacts that the digital storytelling workshops, or in fact that the digital stories themselves have on the audience that are viewing those stories. And so what we want to do in our workshops is, number one, encourage communication and socialization, the maintenance and development of cognitive communication, media, and technology skills. And we want, hopefully, to provide some social and emotional benefits. So here's a cartoon, kind of the attitudes that people sometimes bring in our society. You can see he's shoveling the snow in his walk and putting it behind him. For some of you from Vancouver, by the way, this is white, cold stuff. You'll see it if you go back east. And so as he puts it behind, he says, "Why should other people benefit from my hard work?" Well, we're moving to a different model in our workshops, a model that looks like this, where 0 says to 1, "Without you, I am nothing." Right? Okay? In other words, a very collaborative, community-based experience, and a very social experience and a connected experience where people really share with one another. There's an example of one of our early groups afterwards. Well, you should note they were all smiling. So we recruited them by approaching senior centers, neighborhood houses, community centers, did posters, media releases, etc. We had no trouble recruiting, and did an 8 to 10 week storytelling workshop in libraries, long-term care facilities. And there are 2 phases to the workshops. First, people develop their story, or their idea for the story, ultimately a storyboard, etc., a script, and then afterwards the software called WeVideo, which is fairly simple. We reviewed a lot of software. It's a lot easier than iMovie for some of you that know it, and many seniors have no trouble with that software, and certainly we're there to help them and support them. So to create a story, to begin a story, we would say something like, reflect back on your life. Are there a few events that stand out in your mind or that affected you more deeply? Pick 1 or 2 and describe what happens. And then we even have people go home and they bring artifacts in that remind them of their story, and they get started. And the idea in these workshops is that people share their ideas at every session with one another. They give each other feedback, they make suggestions, etc. And they go fairly deep in terms of some aspect of their lives with one another. And a typical workshop outline might look like this. An introduction, we show them the software, a few sample stories. I'd love to show you a story if we had time, but it's a 6 or 8 minute thing, but you can see some on the website that I'll give you later. And they write a story in a script and share the story, etc., go through the process, and eventually create a story. We try to make it really simple. First pants, then your shoes. But seriously, the idea is that we want people to feel confident, and we want them to know that they can do this, and we make it really easy. So I should mention that since this is a research-funded project, there has to be research. But for me, it's not about the research. It's about the process of working with older adults to improve people's quality of life. And what is the research about? The research is to show that, in fact, it's working. So one might even think of the research as an evaluation. And what can we learn from that experience? So is there an impact on their social connectedness as a result of attending it? What are the opinions about their experience and about the process in the workshop? What are viewers' opinions about and reactions to the stories that they're viewing? So far, I'm reporting on 40 or so participants that we've had, 7 offerings of the workshop. They were aged 55 and older, but the participants range from those who worked with computers in their careers to those who had never used one. So we had great diversity, and as we know in the senior population, there is great diversity. We used both quantitative and qualitative, or as we say, mixed methods for the research. So we had a pre and post self-report questionnaire on social connectedness and a workshop evaluation form. And on the workshop evaluation form, we collected some qualitative data with open-ended questions. We did focus group interviews after each of the workshops. And then we did a questionnaire for viewers who were viewing the digital stories. There was a 5-point Likert scale on the social connectedness scale, evaluation form at the end, etc. I'll skip over that. Did data analysis, used SPSS, and the open-ended questions. We did content analysis. We coded the transcripts. So here are some results so far. The great majority, and we found this, we're also doing, by the way, some work on digital games for older adults, and on all our studies so far for digital games as well as for digital storytelling, the great majority of participants are female. And this is reflected here. We can see that 3/4 were female. There was but we've got a nice balance in age categories from 55 to 89 years old, fairly well balanced across those age groups. You could see that we had 20%, a little over 20%, that were 75 years old and older. Almost half immigrated to Canada, And many of the stories are about that period back home or in coming to Canada. And in terms of computer skills, about 2/3 are rating themselves as intermediate or advanced, and about 1/3 as none or beginner. Okay, so let's look at some of the results. The social connected one. So overall, we had some gain in social connectedness, but it wasn't significant. It wasn't statistically significant from pre to post test. So we tested at the beginning, tested at the end. But interestingly enough, when we looked at the female data by itself, there was no difference. When we looked at the male data, even though there were only a small number of males, we found a significant difference. When looking at the data, why do you think that would be? Because the males started much lower. And in fact, on a social scale, on a social connectedness scale, we found that by the end, the males had reached the same level as the females. They had just started much lower at the beginning. Okay, what about the workshop evaluation? Again, I'm not reporting everything, just some highlights for the time we have here, but overall, nearly everybody rated it as good or very good. And 95% of participants felt the process used was good or very good. In other words, the highest scores on the scales. The software was rated very highly. People found it quite usable, and about 2/3 found the workshop difficulty just right. In fact, I haven't reported it here, but about 30% found it a little bit difficult, so they needed help. In terms of 2/3 of participants reported that they improved their computer skills, so that was a side benefit, and all of them reported some increase in digital storytelling skills, with almost 3/4 saying very or extremely improved, because they went through the process of creating a story, the narrative process. So what did they like best? 3 major themes emerged from all of the transcripts. Number 1, the shared social experience. That was the big one. The second one was their ability for expression through learning the story creation process, and the facilitators, or the facilitation of the workshops. For today's presentation, I'm only going to focus on the first one. So here's some examples that show the camaraderie and appreciation that participants shared during the collaborative story creation. The fellowship moral support of fellow participants, sharing the works of other participants, interaction with other participants, supporting each other. And these are comments that were written on the evaluation form. The big suggestion for improvement, more time, more editing time. Over and over and over, people wanted more time. What we did is we had extra sessions outside of the workshops where we worked with them in tutorials to help people finish their stories. I'd say that about 97% or so of people actually did finish their stories. What about the focus groups? Well, a preliminary analysis of themes, we saw that we had benefits related to social, emotional, and cognitive areas. For example, here's a nice quote. I really feel mentally, psychologically, and emotionally more healthy having taken this class. Being with people, getting out to this class, coming here and learning, and just having people just be who they are. Social benefits, just a few quotes. We had many, many quotes, but here's just a few. This is more participatory, which is good because it encourages each other. Experiencing other people's stories makes you, I don't know, a better person. I don't know what it does, but it just makes you maybe understand people more. I think that's what it is. And you look at people and you meet them the first day and we're all strangers. But then by the end of the time, you know these little bits about that person, that it's personal. Just to mention a few cognitive benefits that was interesting. It's very rushed working on that, using your brain and your creativity and your ideas. It keeps me awake at nights. You really have to use your brain. Yeah, and your memory. And since we know that we have associations between social connectedness and cognitive benefits, that's really important. And what about the emotional benefits? Yeah, but you know, every Tuesday I will, looking forward to coming to the library and meeting all of you. It makes me happy, you know. Finally, just to finish the results from 60 people. We had a session in Burnaby at the Shadbolt Center. We had 60 people come at all different ages, including the storytellers and their families and their friends and other people who just heard about it. And we viewed 14 stories. I gave people a questionnaire, a form, and after each story we gave them a minute or two to fill it out. We asked them to rate the story, tell us what they liked about it, etc. And at the end, we basically said, choose your 3 favorite stories. And then we said, why did you choose these stories as your 3 favorite? And here's just a few reasons. Because they had a powerful message, meaningful, touching, one message, honesty, humor, creativity, spirit, determination and perseverance of the individual's family, gives life's valuable lessons, legacy. I like stories of overcoming adversity. And again, we had many, many more. So one of the things we're looking at in terms of the viewers, and particularly with younger people, in fact, we're developing a module on ageism for the schools where we're going to use these stories, is we're sort of saying to people, okay, what are the messages you're getting from the stories? Are you learning anything from the stories? What are the stories telling you? And here are some of the things people are saying. Accepting differences, being thankful, caring can come in surprising ways, cherishing people's kindness, giving gratitude, never too late to acknowledge, let people know people know you value them while they're still alive, overcoming prejudice and learning family values. So amazingly inspiring things. And then we say, did you experience any emotions while watching these stories? And here's just a few that people have given us, and you could see. And not only the storytellers themselves, because we often watch the storytellers as they're viewing their own story, and they tear up a little bit sometimes, but the audience members do sometimes. Some of the stories are incredibly touching. So to conclude, I'd say the results offer evidence that older adults find that creating their own digital story is a worthwhile experience. Participants greatly valued the shared social experience, and viewers of these artifacts appeared to greatly appreciate the value of the stories. So what are the next steps? We'll do more workshops, we'll collect more data, do further analysis, and in particular, we're analyzing the stories themselves to see what are the themes that emerge out of the stories. In other words, what are the life lessons that come out of these stories? What, if you ask a group of older adults to tell their story, what are they sharing? And what can we learn from that? So we do a thematic analysis of that, and we're starting now projects to work with dementia patients, in fact. And we have a project starting with Andrew Sixsmith and Lily Liu from University of Alberta to do some storytelling, and it'll be a very different model than we use here. We're also beginning some projects with other people, for example, working with the Prince George Hospice Society, and by the way, you'll hear from them tomorrow during the presentation. Shannon Freeman and Donna Flood will give you a link to see a story that we created, or they created, about the hospice itself and about the history of the hospice. We'll be doing stories with First Nations people, with homeless seniors, with many, many different types of stories. So I want to thank the Age Well National Center of Excellence and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for their financial support. There's a link to a current website, and there are 4 stories on that website now, so you can just click on there and view a few of our stories. And finally, my email. If anybody would like to get involved in this, if anybody would like to attend any of our workshops at all, if anybody wants to be involved in the research, and if anybody is interested in being involved in our research on digital games, for example, we're doing escape rooms and many different interesting things. We have a lot of seniors already working with us, helping us to develop games for seniors. Please email me at this number, and we'll get back, email and I'll get back to you for sure. Okay, so to finish, I just say, by God, for a minute there, it suddenly all made sense. Thank you.
I really want to appreciate your presentation. It's a great example of how the Age Well funds are being used effectively, and what a great way for someone to tell their life story digitally, and it can be recorded. And I can only imagine thinking about the last presentation from the last session around how care aides in nursing homes could be using that information, and all staff could be, to better understand the person they're caring for and know them, what they were like before they moved in, not necessarily as somebody who has dementia who lives in a care facility. So thank you so much for that presentation, and there'll be a chance to ask some questions after the next presentation. So now we're going to hear from Wesley Ching, who is the Executive Director of Televisit Incorporated in Palo Alto. He's going to talk about televisiting. And just before I hand the microphone over to him, it's a little bit about Palo Alto. Some of you might know that there's a university in that town called Stanford. Thank you. So Stanford University, they did a social experiment with the Bronx compared to Palo Alto, how the two were different about 40 years ago. What they did was they took the exact same kind of car, and they put the hood of the car, they opened it up, and they wanted to see what would happen. They left the car alone, driverless, with the doors unlocked. The car in the Bronx, 24 hours later, was stripped completely. It didn't look like a car anymore. All the good parts were taken away. Hubcaps, everything was gone. And the car in Palo Alto, Someone had seen the car, and it was raining at the time, and they closed the hood. Little difference, and I think we'll find out how nice people from Palo Alto are. So without further ado, Wesley.
Thank you very much. Speaking of cars, it seems every other car in Palo Alto is a Tesla. Except for my neighborhood, I drive an old beat-up car. And the other thing that was spoken by our earlier presenter on video was it's also the test bed for the automotive, sorry, what do they call it? Anyway, self-driving cars. And yes, I absolutely agree with that. I see about 4 to a dozen every single day. And it's quite disconcerting because the new ones, you don't see the driver holding the wheel at all because there is no wheel. It's just a little joystick that they hold, and sometimes they don't even hold it. Anyway, if you like an adventure, come down to Palo Alto sometime. So Televisit is a nonprofit, and we started as a social experiment to see if we could build virtual communities to reduce social isolation. Now, I think we've seen many reports already, and there's more coming out all the time. This one's from AARP a couple of years ago, talking about how social detachment is as bad for you as smoking and worse than obesity. There's one that came out about a month ago, and it's some new research showing that feeling lonely or socially isolated bumps up a person's average risk for coronary heart disease and stroke by 50%. And there's more and more of this actual research that's showing a direct link between social isolation and also physical issues. We believe, even though I'm in the heart of Silicon Valley with all the technology, that the best technology for social isolation is actually a human, is not a computer. And what we try to do is use technology but make it disappear, because we believe that social interaction is the key for successful aging. And what I'm going to do in this talk is share with you some of the things we did. I'll even share with you some of the mistakes we've made, because there have been many. And I'm going to share with you some of the lessons we've learned. So this is you when you were born. Yes, you were green. And over time, you grew your social network with your school, your work, your church, whatever it may be. But as time goes on, it becomes smaller and smaller. And at the end, a lot of times we've had many people, including those in Silicon Valley with all the technology and Teslas in the world, that are living alone. And that picture on the right is actually a US mailman, because one of the articles that was written about socially isolated elders was that their only friend was the mailman. He's the only person that they saw every day. And one of the quotes that I've heard many times is, "Why have they forgotten me?" Indeed, they are the forgotten population. So the question is, why doesn't grandma get socialization? Well, the obvious answer is their mobility and transportation challenges. We haven't quite gotten the self-driving cars to the stage yet, although I'll be honest with you, I have a group of people that I work with. I actually volunteered them to Google. I haven't heard back from them yet to see what's going to happen. At least in the US, I understand it's not the same in Canada, there is a stigma about senior centers. In fact, the word senior is actually taboo. It's not politically correct, so I'm so refreshed that I can use that word freely in Canada. We use the word older adult, which, well, I'm not sure what that means. Yeah, that's right. And what we also found, really the genesis of the whole Televisit experiment, was there were not enough volunteers to go one-on-one to visit shut-in seniors. If they can't get out, then you have to go to them. But how are you going to go to them if there aren't enough people? Well, the standard answer I heard from many of the people in Silicon Valley is, well, gosh, that's easy. Give them a tablet, put Skype on there, put email, and you're done. Well, guess what we found out? I've given many talks before, and I usually use sort of a survey that says, how many of you done this to your parents? And almost everyone in Silicon Valley will put up their hand. And I said, how many of you actually called mom, within the first week? Most of them did. Within the first month? About half of them. How about within the last week? Virtually nobody did. Okay. So it's really the family's too busy to call, and the family calls are usually what we call checking up. Okay, they call, they say, hey mom, did you eat yet? Oh, did you have a fall? No? Okay, good, bye, see ya. And email doesn't really have a dynamic conversation. It is a very important component, but it doesn't have that dynamic, interactive component to it. And the other key reason that we discovered is that when we hit our 80s, about half of the people have some kind of cognitive impairment. It could be mild cognitive impairment, but that means that people lose the ability to take the initiative. What it means is that even the people who were the most accomplished in their lives and took the most initiative in their lives, they may not take the initiative to make that call or go to the senior center. Well, what we learned over the last 5 years since we've done this is we've done probably over 500 sessions. We actually call people every single day, and we've done over 300 hours of these sessions and touched about 120 people. We've tried all sorts of things. We've done things that worked really well that we've continued. We've done some things that absolutely did not work. We tried a session, and here's a confession. I tried a session once where we had everyone sing together because we thought that was a good idea. Well, given that the technology with all the delays in there, everybody was coming in at different times. Plus, I don't know if you've heard 80 or 90-year-old people sing, they're not always in tune. So we scrapped that experiment, thought that was a bad idea. But what we did is we proved that we could actually build virtual communities. We've had a group that's been with us for 2 years, and they were complete strangers in the beginning, and they're great friends right now. In fact, just about a month ago, we had a party at our house where we invited all of them. They were all in the Bay Area to come and meet each other for the first time. And they hugged each other like they were long-lost friends. And we were absolutely amazed by that. And the reason is because they had these meaningful conversations every day. I bet you some of them have probably told us stories that maybe their own kids don't even know about. The other thing that we started adding was we started to encourage them to do exercise about twice a day. Because you know many of these people will sit in front of the TV for about 8 hours a day and do nothing else. And so what we did is by the way, we don't host the exercise sessions. We actually pre-tape them, and then we play them at different times. And we encourage them, and the tablet will come on, and you have to at least walk up to the tablet and turn it off. So at least you got some exercise. And by the way, we are a little bit Big Brother, we have a way of identifying whether you press the button or not. So the next day we'll always ask, oh, did you do your exercise? And we'll know whether they did. We also try to do about 1 to 2 different brain fitness activities every week. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we do for brain fitness. It's not what you may think it is. And we also have diet and nutrition accountability, where we talk about good habits, good diet, good nutrition. That is probably our least popular topic right now. But we still push forward on that. So what's interesting is everyone knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is where you must fulfill the physical needs before the emotional needs. Well, what's interesting, and many of you have, this morning we already heard 2 references to Atul Gawande's book on being mortal. Well, one of the things that he discovered is that people would willingly sacrifice their safety and survival for the sake of something beyond themselves, such as family, country, justice. So it's interesting because those types of things are actually in the top of the pyramid, not the bottom, because at the end of their life, they figure, you know what, what's the point? We really have to start thinking about these emotional needs. So what we propose is that positive aging really has 2 pillars, both physical and emotional. And if you don't take care of the emotional and only care about the physical, well, that's not a pretty picture, is it? So here's the second part. Here's what we did. Well, first of all, we did use technology because we had to. We couldn't send a person to everyone's house all the time. Plus, we wanted to leverage the number of volunteers that we had. So we had one person basically talk to 8 to 10 people all at the same time to create this community. And essentially, it's an Android tablet. There's nothing special about it. In fact, if you have an Android tablet right now, you could probably go to the Play Store, look up Televiz, and download it, although I would recommend not doing it right now. And it'll come on. By the way, we structured it in such a way that they did not have to learn how to use a tablet. In fact, we don't call it a tablet, we just call it a frame. It's a picture frame. And in the morning at 8 a.m., it just comes on, turns on by itself. It displays a variety of photographs. That's my colleague's dog. And then at an appropriate time, the talking picture frame will ring. And there's only one thing you need to do, is hit the join button. And actually, when we started this, we didn't have any buttons at all, but my lawyer made me do it. And the reason, he said, is for any of these activities, just in case anything happens, like if they fall, you want to have something that says, if you hit the join button, then you release liability. The US being a litigious society as it is. So I added the join button. And then what happens is the host calls all of the clients. Now it's interesting, we actually don't use it on the tablet, we actually call them on the regular phones, okay? Because they're familiar with the regular phones. That's not a technology that they think about. And the other thing too is we actually do not turn on the video camera at all. And we found that by doing that, it actually promotes more honest conversation and allows people to basically take those sessions in whatever they are. They could be in the pajamas. In fact, they often tell us they're having breakfast in the pajamas and we don't care because we're not seeing them. And then the host starts a program. In this particular example, this is one of our board members who has another nonprofit that plays music from the 30s, 40s, and 50s to seniors. We pre-record him so that he doesn't have to be with us every day. This is one of the favorite programs. It's called Johnny's Jukebox. We turn it into a bit of a brain game as well. As you can see, the background right now is empty. This is one of the earlier programs. And they told us that it looked like he was in a jail cell. So we added a green screen and we started putting different backgrounds to it, and we made them guess what kind of different backgrounds he was at, what locations he was at. The other thing too is we made him play snippets of songs from the 30s all the way to the 70s, because it's good to always expand your appreciation. My wife is actually a music therapist, and so it's actually good for her to use this. And in fact, a recent session, he played Rod Stewart's Do You Think I'm Sexy? To which my 88-year-old member said, "What kind of song is that? Do you think I'm..." And he wouldn't even use the word. And we said, well, you know, it's expands your brain, plasticity, blah, blah, blah. Dodged that bullet pretty quick. Well, Doris Day they love. And then after that, usually each of the pre-recorded sessions is only about 5 to 7 minutes. And then the host, who is typically my wife or another volunteer, will facilitate a discussion. And the discussions have ranged from, you know what, I haven't heard this song in 50 years, thank you very much. And the other one was, I got up to dance because I remember hearing this at my high school dance. And this was a lady who wasn't very good on her feet. You know, she was a little unstable, so to be honest, I was a little concerned about that, but she so much enjoyed that. I told you about the exercise. We do different types of exercises. Some of the favorites include Tai Chi, the arthritis exercises, which we've had some really good responses. We have a physical therapist who helps us to put some of these programs on as well. And then at 8 p.m., picture frame just goes off by itself. It's easier than using a real electronic picture frame because you don't even have to turn it on or off. And the next morning, the other favorite topics would be something like travel. And typically, wherever I go, I bring my video camera and I'll shoot videos and talk about it. Or we'll just pull things off YouTube, which is one of the favorite things. This is what I mean by a brain game. Okay, it's not the lumosity type of thing where you really have to work on it. And by the way, there was a Stanford study that proves that it wasn't very conclusive what the benefits were anyway. And in fact, what many people have said is the best brain game is really just socialization, just continuing to talk to people, which is what we do. So we do a style of game which is similar to Double Jeopardy, which you watch on TV. Because one of the things we observed is that many of the seniors that we talked to would always make their schedule around Jeopardy. They would be home so that they could watch Alex Trebek and the rest of the guys go at it. And so what we did is we came up with our own, and basically instead of yelling at the contestants on the screen because they were too stupid to know the answer, we said you get a chance to play along as well. And we let them play along, and they just press the correct answer or not the correct answer, and we always have a great time and laugh at it. And we never keep score, by the way. This is a bingo game. Most of you are familiar with it. We had a member who is a retired Stanford math professor, and he said, I absolutely do not play bingo. Okay, this was beneath him. And I know there are two camps of people, one who love bingo and those who hate bingo. Well, he was one of those who hated bingo. Well, after a few weeks, he decided that he liked bingo. And the reason is we play it differently. And what we do is we don't play normal bingo. We let them make up whatever rules they want. They can spell a letter, like an X, and the math professor will always come out with things like, let's do a geometric shape, like a square, or 3 by 3, or something like that. I came out with a rule that basically says, if you have any two adjacent cells where the difference is 10, you win. They absolutely hated that. But it forced them to use their brain to do the math every single time they got a number. So we've tried all sorts of things. Throwback Thursday, we stole that idea from Facebook, where we reminisce about things. In fact, whenever we have a new member that comes on, what my wife usually does is she interviews them on the phone for a few minutes to find out a little bit about them. And then on the day, what we'll do is she'll pre-search a whole bunch of images. And quite often we can actually find the actual home where they grew up in black and white. We can also find the college and the high school where they were. And it was absolutely amazing. They would be in tears talking about the stories that we could find these things. We do book clubs. Tuesdays with Maury. This one actually was not that popular. They found it a little morbid. I thought it was wonderful. Education, we did one on home safety where my 87-year-old architect was asked to help out, and he loved having that purpose and that meaning to do the research with us. The other thing that we did was on financial scams. I don't know about Canada, but in the US, financial scams are really rampant against seniors. So we did one session, and we actually did a role play where one of the most common scams was someone who calls you, and they basically say, hello, grandma, and they just leave it. And then the elderly person, oh, is that Johnny? And then, of course, he'll say, well, yes, it is, Grandma. It's so good to hear you. They'll go on for a few seconds and say, don't tell my parents, but I need a little help. Can you wire some money to me, Western Union, right? And we played that with them, and they enjoyed it. But it's interesting, a few weeks later, one of them actually got that same call, and they knew exactly what to do. So in the mornings, we typically do sort of social and mental things. In the afternoons, we'll do physical. In fact, one of the experiments we're doing is I'm thinking, in order to make them do more of the exercise, I'm going to randomize the exercise. I'm going to put, pictures of my dogs playing at times. I'll put music just to keep them off balance so that, they don't know what's coming. Because if they know it's 1 o'clock, it's time for the exercise, they may avoid it. I'm going to not tell them and see if they'll show up. So I'll let you know next year how that experiment went or whether they hate me for that. In the evenings, what we've done is sort of stuff for the nutrition and the soul. Okay, 5 lessons, very high level. What community means. Community is about my people. And obviously the closest would be the family. But many of them, even though they have close family, the family's busy. They can't talk to them all the time. How about friends? Those who've shared experiences, the same cohort, that's really important. I put here veterans of foreign wars, at least in the US. That's a really strong brotherhood. So we have a couple of guys who were veterans from the Korean War, and they really get along. People in a similar culture. We've had people from India. And what's interesting is as you get older, you sort of revert a little bit back to your culture. You're more comfortable in that culture. So we're trying to find other people from that culture so that they can be part of that. They also kind of revert back to the language in which they grew up. And then they're professional caregivers. Okay, we just had a talk just now about caregivers. They're part of the community too. They're a very important part of the community. I'll say a little bit more about some of the things with professional caregivers and your neighbors. Can a virtual community be a real community? That's a real question, because what we're trying to do is see if we can leverage our resources to reach as many people as possible. And if you remember back in the days, I don't know if you remember, there was this concept called pen pals with the internet that's kind of disappeared. My sister had a pen pal from Switzerland, and it was kind of cool. She would write a letter, and a few weeks later, she'd get a reply. And of course, we'd all read it. And it was pretty interesting, but it felt like a real friendship was being formed. What's interesting, too, is many people think of celebrities and TV personalities as their friends. they don't know who you are, I'm sorry. But because they're familiar, they think of them as their friends. So if you can imagine people thinking of those celebrities and TV personalities as your friends, what more people who actually talk to you every single day. In fact, we have an example of a lady who had cancer 8 times. In fact, I haven't quite kept touch. She may have passed away. But she felt really bad because she couldn't join all the time because she had all these doctor's appointments and she felt bad. And what happened was the rest of the group just rallied and gave her the emotional support. And what's interesting is that the rest of the people felt really good because there was something they could actually do to provide emotional support for this one lady. The second lesson we learned is that building community requires a lot of patience. It's taken us years. There is no instant solution. I'm sorry to say that. And technology is not a magic bullet. What we had to do was develop trust. That really was the most important thing that we had to do. And regular and frequent interaction was really important as well, to build that familiarity, to build that trust that no, we were not out to get them. And finding common ground and shared interests was always something that we tried to do. One of the things we learned too is that we couldn't just cut them loose. We actually had to facilitate. And initially when the group was younger, we actually had to be more active in the facilitation. They didn't talk as much. In fact, there was one lady who basically didn't talk for months, and we were sure she was going to drop out. But we later found out she was really shy, and after 2 years, she's still with us, and she considers us a friend. In fact, she had to go to hospital for a procedure, and she said, "Can I take this tablet with me because these are my friends?" And we said, "Yeah, sure. Just plug it in, you're done." And as we mentioned before, with people in their 80s, it overcomes a lack of initiative, okay? Because we're always going out and taking the initiative and talking to them and calling them up and saying, "How you doing? Would you like to join the session today?" Here's something we learned over the years. Why do members drop out? By the way, we deal with a lot of rejection. We've gotten used to that. Well, the dropout is highest in the first week, as you can imagine. Those who stay with us after the first week are usually hanging around for a long time. And some of the reasons, I'm very busy. And you look at this lady, it's like, what are you doing? You don't go anywhere. You're stuck in your room. Who are you busy with? And it's usually she's watching TV. The other ones, I'm not a shut-in. There's a lot of denial going on in here. Now, this one's a real one. I cannot hear. Okay, I cannot hear. Now, many of them do have devices that will help, and you can always plug in an external speaker. And for those people who had the external speaker, it's actually worked out well. In this particular person who dropped out, I actually believe that she actually just didn't want to join us and use that as an excuse. I don't need it. That's a very common one. Just don't talk to me. I don't need it. And one of the reasons is people who've been isolated for a long time kind of operate from fear. And so anything that's different or new is scary to them. And I just don't want anything to come into my life. Similar to this, I don't know these people. Why should I trust you? And my favorite, you are interrupting my dinner. This was one lady who basically, we actually went to her house, introduced ourselves. We did the whole thing. We thought we did everything right. And the next day we called her to start the session, and she says, I'm in the middle of my dinner. She hung up, and she never allowed us to call her back again. So, anyway. Power of stories. David Kaufman, you were just talking about stories. We knew coming in that stories were really important. All of you know Erickson's psychosocial network, stage 8 being ego, integrity, and despair. They're trying to figure out the meaning in their lives by telling these stories. In fact, I love stories. I love listening to stories. In fact, I've been told I have a very annoying habit of sitting next to people on airplanes and basically talking to them the entire time. In fact, my daughter accused me on one recent East-West flight of talking to the lady next to me for 6 hours straight. I'm sure that's not true because she went to the restroom at least 12 times. And there was a rumor there was a scuffle in the back where a lady tried to leave the plane at 35,000 feet. In any case, I bring back all these stories to my team at work, and they say, you meet the most interesting people. And I said, no, everyone is interesting. All you need to do is ask. They're all interesting. Everyone is interesting. And what people are doing is basically reliving their memories, where they grew up, the cars they drove, and we're trying to find those pictures. If not the exact color or model, we'll try to find something close because it gives them the meaning in their lives. One of the things we're trying recently is working with another professor down in the Bay Area on a relatively new field called narrative gerontology, which uses the power of stories. Now, it's interesting, it's not therapy, okay? We don't go and psychoanalyze their stories and say, aha, this is where you went wrong. We let them tell their stories because that's the point. It's just telling stories. And it doesn't have to do with anything about growing old. It can be talking about a pet, for instance, but it's very therapeutic, as the previous speaker basically talked about. So we give them lots of time to tell stories. Fourth lesson, the importance of control and choice. This is one we kind of bumped into by accident because we thought that, oh, you know, we're here to serve you. And I think many of us professionals and caregivers think that here's the senior, we're here to serve you. But it cannot be a one-way thing, us to them. They need to feel that they have something to contribute, some sense of control. It's really important, because that gives them the meaning and purpose. That's why we do things with Johnny's Jukebox, where we actually let them request the songs. We actually give them some choices as the background we stick him in. We also do things like the bingo, where they can play their own games. They can give us requests. This gives them power and choice, where in their lives they see it slipping away every day. The fifth and final one is we have limitations. And I kind of learned this the hard way in many cases. There's a professional relationship among caregivers who come into the home in many cases. They're regulatory. In the US, there's a law for everything. So there's many regulatory implications on what you can and you cannot do. There's all kinds of liability issues. And there's always that employer-employee relationship. Okay, so that in many cases, they don't want to talk to their caregiver because, you know what, you're not my friend, I'm paying you, sort of a professional relationship. So there are limitations as to what you can do as a professional caregiver. The family has limitations as well. They have time limitations, they don't have very much time to talk to mom or take care of mom. Their distance, as an earlier speaker talked about, where many families have moved away. And then that's old parent-child thing. Oh, I'm your mother. I've seen you in diapers. You cannot tell me what's best for me. And the friends, right? Friends, of course, always come with the best advice, but they can have to stay clear of sort of legal and financial type of advice that they give. So we all have to understand the limitations that we have. Okay, so finally, I actually invite you to join us as we kind of continue this journey we've been going for the last 5 years. We're actually going to start an experiment with Canada, mainly because my research director lives here in Vancouver. She's right here in the front row. And we'd love to, because I think the specific environment that you have here makes it perfect for trying something like televisit, probably even better than Palo Alto, California. We are partnering with universities. There are some in the US we're talking to as well, to really help to understand and quantify the benefits of socialization. There's my email. Thank you very much.
Fantastic presentations, both of you. Do we have time for questions, Gloria? 5 minutes for questions. And can I ask people perhaps who haven't asked questions yet to come to the microphone? We have a question.
It's not really a question. I'm Sherry Baker with the BC Association of Community Response Networks. We do elder abuse awareness and prevention around the province. And of course, one of the issues around elder abuse relates to isolation. And what we're doing now is to introduce a lot of intergenerational work. And what occurred to me as what we're all talking about, we're telling stories and working with the seniors. But if you can also include in some of those, bringing in younger people and letting them participate in it. We've just created a suite of materials. We're in 133 communities in BC. We've got a lot of activity going on. And we're introducing it tomorrow in our monthly learning event. We have a PowerPoint, we have a guide, and we have a suite of activities that people can mine to use in their communities in any way they wish. It's a huge resource created for us by Sharon McKenzie, who's one of the leading people doing intergenerational work. So I refer you to that. We're over here at the table, and you can get our information and how to get on it there. And they're all on our website right now, so you can take a look at them. But thank you. It was a really interesting, all of you, presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Question?
Dan, can I?
Oh, you want to comment?
Just a quick response to say, yeah, we are starting intergenerational work for sure. One little twist on it that's really interesting. And Shannon, are you here? Could you stand up just for a second? Shannon Freeman? If you want to talk to Shannon, we're looking at beginning a project with First Nations group, which would be intergenerational, where in fact they'll be using elementary school children, because high school kids are dropping out, unfortunately, and teaming them up with the elders in the community, and the kids have the technical skills and the elders have the stories, and as a way of collecting the stories, but at the same time as a way of preserving the language for that First Nations group. It's a great project if you want to talk to Shannon about it.
Question?
Just a small comment. Nobody probably recognized Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend, which you very artistically dug out. But my question to both of you is, would you be open to storytelling and your televisit to smaller ethnic communities out here?
Absolutely. By the way, I should mention Roger Daltrey is my friend, actually. Yes, definitely. We can talk later. Thank you.
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, I think one of the key things we're discovering is that many people actually do regress, and I mean that in a good way, to the culture in which they're familiar. So right now, as a matter of fact, we just have a brand new member who is, I believe, 86 years old. She's originally from Pune in India. So we're looking for other people from South Asia who could join her. Absolutely.
One last question.
Jean Sickman from Costco, Council of Senior Citizens. Can you tell me how you were able to actually identify and find those who are socially isolated, since they don't connect with the outside world? How were you able to get them to join in on all this?
You saved the best question for last, so I'll pass it to my colleague.
Chicken.
It's very hard because nobody would step up and say, I'm socially isolated. What we found with some of our clients is their adult children basically suggest that we talk to them. And by the way, we don't use the word isolation or loneliness to them. We just come over and say, hey, this is a cool socialization. The other thing is we're trying to get more publicity. We've had one write-up. We're trying to go to the local newspapers to share our stories and have people join us.
Yeah, that's fine for the ones who have family and that. But for those who are truly isolated, living on their own with no outside connection, they're the ones that we need to reach. Absolutely. How would you know they exist?
Absolutely, and that, to be honest, that's an area where we still haven't solved that problem, because we're depending, for example, a lot on word of mouth. For example, people to come to our workshops, they tell their friends, and they encourage them to come, and all. But by definition, they're not isolated. They have a friend that's telling them to come to the workshop. So we haven't reached that group so well yet. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
So,
Kichichi?
just before I hand the microphone back to Gloria, I just wanted to thank our speakers for this presentation. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the theme of storytelling and the use of technology that can make the lives of seniors better. Round of applause for our speakers. I know Gloria wants to send you off, but just before she does, I just want to give two other book recommendations. I knew Atul Gawande's book, which is still on the New York Times best-selling list. It keeps on getting a lot of publicity. I want to mention two other books. One is higher up on the ranking in the New York Times best-selling list. It's a book called When Breath Becomes Air. Highly recommend it. Similar topic. It's a shorter read, and it's about a 36-year-old medical student who gets stage 4 lung cancer. It's an excellent read. And of course the book Still Alice. If you haven't read it, read it. If you have a copy, pass it to somebody who hasn't read it. And Gloria's going to say a few words. I think it's worthwhile just to mention this is the 25th year of the Friesen Conference, and there are a lot of people in this room who have had a huge role to play in making this conference happen for the past quarter century. And you think about the impact that it's had on all of us in this room and on seniors and gerontology and pushing the envelope, pushing the agenda of gerontology forward. So I hope a round of applause for everyone involved in the Friesen Conference.